Welcome to another Bowrobics. The last one was about growing notes. We talked about notes that grew both in volume and intensity by moving the bow nearer the bridge but not speeding it up. So we had a note that grew from almost nothing to the loudest, most intense sound we could manage right on top of the bridge by the end of it. Now, if you've been trying that out, you may have discovered a problem, which is that once you've grown your note and you've reached the best, most intense, most dramatic sound, if you've then tried to play another note afterwards, you might have found it's really quite difficult. So far, so good. And then you try and change bow right on top of the bridge, right at the most amount of pressure that you could possibly put on, and it crunches and cracks horribly. If you try starting a note right on top of the bridge with loads of pressure at either end of the bow, it's going to sound terrible. You can get to it by a kind of process of warming the string up as you go, but you really can't start a note absolutely on top of the bridge, absolutely with full pressure and full weight behind it. It's just not possible. So we talked about wanting that note for things like this. For growing the intensity of a harmony, particularly a dissonance, to the point at which one of the parts then feels obliged to move itself onto something slightly more relaxed. So the point of that is this. The problem is, if we can't change note once we get there, what are we going to do? And the answer is, you have to start the relaxing, the coming away, slightly before you change bow. So you reach the most intense part of the sound, and you've just started to turn the corner and come away from it before you try and change bow. It's difficult to do that and explain it at the same time, so I'll do it without talking this time. So now, not only are we steering towards the bridge, reaching the most intense part of the sound, but we're also turning the corner and starting to come back before we change bow. Bowing round corners, how do we do it? So you've got to make sure that the peak of the note arrives earlier than it did before. So when we were growing the note just into nothing, we arrived at the maximum strength right down the heel of the bow. So we can't turn round, can we, and come back. You're going to have to time it so that the peak of the note happens earlier in the bow. So that you've got space to come away at the end. So the peak of the note now is going to happen maybe just past the middle. It's going to depend a bit, isn't it, on the context that you're playing in. So you've got to speed things up a bit. I don't think I mean speed it up horizontally. I don't think I mean you need to move the bow faster. But you've got to get on with getting towards the bridge more quickly, because if you leave it too late, you're going to run out of bow, or you won't reach the peak before you need to start coming away. So you've got to, as soon as you've started, you've got to really get on with that move towards the bridge, so that by now I've still got plenty of space to go to start to come back again. And it really is just a reverse process. So in the way that moving towards the bridge involved sinking down and taking the pressure off with the ring finger, coming back again just involves the reverse. So you're just starting to, rather than move down that way, you kind of draw a circle, part of a circle, and you've gone down towards the bridge, and as you reach that point of the bow, you're starting to bring this hand back up, but you're also helping it out with this finger, taking some of the weight. So it's a sort of circular process. Here we are, miles from the bridge, lots of support with the ring finger. This hand is high up the string. My right hand is sinking down towards the bridge, and now it's coming back up again. So the journey of my right hand has gone like that. It's drawn a semicircle. Put the bow back in it. So the progress of that hand is really quite a circular one. I think there's a risk that you end up compromising the angle of the bow when you do this, moving near and away from the bridge. So as your hand goes down towards the bridge, if you're not careful, the bow's going to end up at this angle, and as your hand brings the bow away from the bridge, your bow ends up at that angle, and that's not going to do the sound any favours, is that you need to be parallel to the bridge the whole time. So you've got to watch that you're taking this end of the bow with you, with this hand, that you're not ending up that way. And again, that is where the awareness of this ring finger comes in. It can really help to be taking that end of the bow in connection with your hand, that your hand doesn't go kind of independently and the tip just ends up wafting about following the general direction that it gets pushed in, but that it is attached to this hand. So again, pick a string that you know, pick a string that you like, and time it so that now your most intense sound is about halfway through the bow, and then you can turn round and start to head back. And again, do it both ways. It is much harder to start at the heel. It's possible, but it's more difficult. And it's largely because actually the bow is designed to be different at different ends. If you like, the aerodynamics of our bow means that the two ends of it are designed to do completely different things. It's the same if you think about overhand baroque bow, violin or cello bow hold, that the weight at the heel is totally different to the weight at the tip. And later, modern orchestral violin bows are designed so that if you're playing in a socking great symphony orchestra with 29 trumpets, trombones and whatever else in the brass department, and the strings are trying to maintain some enormous great melody at the maximum amount of sound the whole time, so you can have this sweeping great romantic melodic line, you need a bow that just lets you keep turning round and keep the sound going. When do we ever need to do that in our period? We've basically got two influences on our music, haven't we? We've got the vocal style, the vocal influence, and then dance as a massive influence on instrumental music. And if we're playing vocal stuff, we're thinking in terms of shapes of words, in terms of vowels that have a real shape to them, consonants that begin and end those notes in very specific and differently articulated ways. And then the dance influence of needing notes that are light and springy and lifted, or notes that have real weight behind them. And we deliberately use different bits of the bow to get each of those effects, because the bow is designed to be different and to handle differently at each end. So it's completely understandable and it's completely right that there are easier and more difficult ways of doing one technique. It's much easier to start gently at the tip, of course it is, because the tip of the bow is much lighter. So it's much easier that way round. It's much easier to grow a note as you move towards the heel, towards the heavier part of the bow. It's much more natural that way round than it is to start at the heel and get that same shape the other way. But in real life, we don't always end up with our bow for every note, for every bit, exactly the way round that we would like. We don't always end up starting in precisely the place that we might have done if we bowed slightly more carefully in the bar before it. So you have to be able to do it both ways. Pick a string, speed the whole thing up. You need to be nearer the bridge, much earlier, and then drift away again. It's very relaxing, really. You can just spend hours entertaining your neighbours, pushing that sound without speeding the bow up and timing it. Watch your bow. Don't watch any music, any notes or anything else. Don't do it kind of looking out the window. Watch your bow. Get used to, what does it feel? How long have I got time-wise? How long does it take to get to there? Because if you never learned that by looking at your bow, if you've never worked that out when your eyes are wholly on this stick, how on earth are you going to remember what that feels like when your eyes are on a piece of music instead? So take the opportunity to just play about and watch what is going on, watch where you are on the string, and be really conscious of what it feels like, so that when it gets to needing to try that out and you're in a real live situation, you've got music in front of you, you can remember what it feels like and you've got that to draw on.